God Ammon took the shape of a human with his head topped by a crown of two perpendicular feathers. He could also appear in the figure of a complete ram, for the ram was the sacred shape of God Ammon. Sometimes he takes the shape of Min, the god of fertility, and in other times he takes the geese form. The cult of God Ammon started in Armant and flourished in Thebes, but he was mentioned in the Pyramids texts as an eternal god, for he was connected with the octonary of El-Ashmonin. His cult stretched to reach the whole Egyptian region as a god of the country. He was also connected to god Zeus in Greece. There has been a merge between God Ammon and God Ra, starting from the 11th dynasty. This has appeared for the first time on the board of King Intef-Wa-Hanch, or Intef II. He was also mentioned in more than a place in the reliefs of the temple of King Montuhotep II Nebet-Hebet Ra, to gain the adjectives of God Ra and his powerful status between people. It was difficult for the people to understand the meanings of obscurity and ambiguity and invisibility to which his name points. Frankfurt sees that the reason of merging Ra and Ammon was due to the nature of Ammon being the god of air, for the creative force in air and its equivalent in the sun was one, and that elevating God Ammon-Ra to the status of the greatest god was on the basis of that there is no other force in the universe that can be equal to mixing the sun with air. But it's worth mentioning that describing Ammon as a god of air wasn't being told except in the time of the New Kingdom. The two straight reeds above the head of Ammon, with which he appears in the scenes of the Middle Kingdom, do not express him as a god of air, for these feathers were not confined to the god of the air Shu and Enheret, or the deities that fly in the air, Hur and Muntu, but other gods shared that with them. As an example of the gods who had feathers, God Min and God Osiris, and none of them was a god of air, for God Min was a god of fertility, and God Osiris was the god of resurrection, and has some fertility advantages too. God Ammon has taken from God Min the image of the two straight reeds above his head, for Ammon was connected with him during the Middle Kingdom, and took his fertile image with which he appears, like God Min, in the image of a man surrounded by a tight dress, while his erected male organ sticks out, and his arm is raised with a whip of 3 braids. The head cover is composed of a hood and 2 upright high reeds. Ammon had a human form with a head crowned with 2 feathers standing upright, or he could be a human with a ram head. He had also taken the form of a complete ram, for the ram was a sacred animal of Ammon. He was mentioned earlier in the Pyramids texts as an eternal god when he was connected to El-Ashmonin octonary theory of creation. Ammon's cult reached as far as the whole Egyptian territory as being the formal god of the country. He was also compared to god Zeus in Greece. Herodotus, the Greek historian, has written that the ancient Egyptian religion has attracted the Greeks. On the other hand, the Egyptians repelled from the Greeks' religions. The Ptolemies, starting from King Ptolemy I, tried to establish the foundations of accordance between the Egyptians and the Greeks living in Egypt then, the thing which might serve the political benefits in the country. The fame of Amon's oracle in Siwa reached all the Mediterranean regions since the beginning of the 26th dynasty, which started in 663 BC and ended in 525 BC. But if we wanted to follow the origin of this oracle, we have to assume that it had started sometime during or before the 21st dynasty. This was the time when the power of the priests of Amon and the prophecies of that god reached its peak and played a prominent role in religion and in running the government in Egypt. It's quite possible that a temple dedicated to Amon-Ra was constructed in Siwa in those days, and later it became a center for an oracle which could be depended upon. During the 26th dynasty's era, the fame of Amon's oracle became widely spread in the Libyan desert. The ancient Egyptian engineer had used his astronomical knowledge and subjugated it to serve his creeds and its constructional needs. The most impressive and formidable example of that are the great temples of the New Kingdom. Amongst them, only one stands as a prominent and dominant construction. This shows the perfection of engineering and the geniusity of the ancient Egyptian architect. It's the great temple of Abu Simbel. King Ramesses II, the builder of Abu Simbel temples, is the most famous pharaoh of the 19th dynasty kings. He ruled Egypt after the death of his father Seti I for 67 years. That was between year 1305 and 1237 BC. In a text on the walls of Seti I's temple in Abydos, he mentioned that his son was co-regent with him during the latest period of his 14 years of ruling Egypt. King Ramesses II has immortalized himself by building temples and chapels and stelae all over Egypt, the most important of which is the great temple of Abu Simbel, which he dedicated to the cult of Amon and Ra-Hor-Akhti and Betah and himself. Next to it is a small temple of Abu Simbel known as Queen Nefertari's temple, dedicated to herself and to goddess Hathor. The great temple of Abu Simbel is a unique prototype of its kind in the art of the human architecture. In fact, Ramesses II has distinguished the area of Abu Simbel over other areas where he had built his other temples, for it was considered one of the holiest places 5 centuries before he thought of achieving this great project. The goddess of the western hills, or Apshik, goddess Hathor, was the source of the sanctity of this place. Hatshepsut's temple is ideally placed to view astronomical events towards the eastern horizon, which includes moon and sunrise, as well as the Orion constellation and the star Sirius. The alignment of the temple is set on an azimuth of 116.5 degrees, which when first discovered suggested a midwinter sunrise alignment. While such events can be postulated in theory, they can only really be proved by being tested out on site at the relevant day of the year. On the day of the solstice, a band of low cloud could be seen close to the horizon, which made it very difficult to make out the horizon even with binoculars. Calculations had suggested that the sunrise would occur at 6:32. In fact, the first rays of the morning sun were not visible until 6:33, when the sunrise was perceived very close to the meridian line of the chapel. However, it's still not possible to determine whether these views showed the sun breaking the horizon or cloud line. The orb of the sun occupies about half of the ecliptic at the horizon, its light in effect occupying a quarter of the visible doorway entrance. The first rays of light from the sun dramatically projected a reddish-pink rectangle onto the rear wall of the chapel. As the sun rose, the projected rectangular light image from the entrance doorway slowly moved to the right before finally moving off the rear wall about 11 minutes after its first appearance. We can now be sure that this same event has occurred annually for the past 3,500 years and will continue to do so in the future. Ramses II Great Temple came to add more overwhelming feeling of greatness and holiness to this area, for its location was carefully chosen to stand by the Nile on the west bank, rising 124 meters above sea level. The two temples were completely hewn out of the solid rock. Its massive height, that reaches 33 meters, dazzles the viewer with the artistic consistency between itself and the rest of its constructional elements, as well as the incredible harmony between the monument and the mountainous environment which surrounds it. Abu Simbel Temple is composed of a facade occupied by 4 colossal statues of Ramses II, each 20 meters high, and represents him throughout the 4 phases of his life. Then, a great colonnade with giant pillars and statues of the pharaoh is situated directly behind the facade. The hall has side chambers and opens to another hall with reliefs all around the walls. At the depth of 63 meters lies the most important part of the temple, and the cause of its famosity worldwide, both in the ancient times and the modern ones. It's a miraculous sanctuary. In the sanctuary, there are 4 statues. The first one on the left represents God Ptah, the god of literature and art. The second statue is of god Ammon. The third statue is King Ramses II in his divine nature, and the fourth one to the right is god Ra-Hur-Akhti. The axis of the temple was aligned from west to east in such a way that twice a year the rays of the rising sun reached the divine figures on the rear wall of the sanctuary. On the 22nd of October and the 22nd of February at dawn, the viewers hold their breath, waiting for that glorious moment when the sun beigefully rises in the sky bit by bit, steadily, focusing its rays onto the depth of the temple and on its rarest part and its most sacred one, the sanctuary. The sun then travels slowly and shines over the four faces seated there, one after another from right to left, starting with the sun god Ra-Hur-Akhti and ending by Betah, the god of art and darkness, resting on the way on god Amun-Ra and King Ramses II faces. That miraculous view is one of the most important living proofs to the geniusity of the ancient Egyptians in astronomy and mathematics, and subjugated them to serve their engineering purposes. When the construction of the high dam started in 1960, the water level behind it was expected to rise over 133 meters above sea level. The great temple of Abu Simbel was just 124 meters higher, and the small one 120 meters only. Submerging under the Nile water was inevitable. In 1964, the UNESCO began a rescue mission that seemed impossible. Its plan was dismantling the stones of the temples in the most accurate way and reconstructing them in a new higher location. The challenge was the preservation not only of the natural rock-cut image of both temples, but also of the miraculous engineering phenomena of the sun alignment over the statues inside the sanctuary of the Great Temple that happens only twice a year, in the 20th of February and 20th of October. The new location of the temples was chosen 65 meters higher and directed 180 degrees northwest of the original location. That difference shifted the days to 2 days later. This massive work ended in just 4 years in 1968 and costed 16 million Egyptian pounds, of which Egypt paid the third, the United States the third, and 50 European countries the last third. Just like all pharaohs, King Ramses II wanted to commemorate his name with the gods, and indeed, by his great constructional achievements, presented best in Abu Simbel temples, he'll be remembered with glory forever.